The day began like any other, a blur of emails, client calls, and the comforting rhythm of routine. By mid-afternoon, however, a sudden cancellation freed the narrator from work earlier than expected. She welcomed the rare chance to beat the traffic, imagining a quiet hour at home before dinner. Her husband, Mark, wouldn't be back until evening, and her 16-year-old stepson, Ethan, usually spent his afternoons either at soccer practice or behind his bedroom door, with music thumping faintly through the walls. Driving home, she thought about the small but steady progress she'd made in blending their family over the past year. When she married Mark, she knew that winning Ethan's trust would be a marathon, not a sprint. Their interactions so far had been polite, occasional conversations about school projects or weekend plans, but there was a thin, polite distance between them. She hoped time and patience would soften that boundary. As she unlocked the front door, a hush greeted her. No TV, no clatter of dishes, not even the faint bass of Ethan's favorite playlists. The house seemed to exhale a heavy stillness, the kind that makes you instinctively pause and listen. She set down her bag, calling a casual hello into the quiet hallway. No answer. Maybe Ethan had gone out after all. Heading toward the kitchen, she noticed his sneakers by the entryway, muddy from yesterday's rain. So he was home. A flicker of unease passed through her. Nothing dramatic, just a motherly alertness she hadn't yet admitted she felt for him. She climbed the stairs, each creak of the steps echoing louder than usual, until she reached the second-floor landing. Light spilled faintly from the crack beneath Ethan's door. It wasn't the warm glow of a lamp, but the bluish hue of a computer screen. She heard something, a muffled sound, almost like a choked sigh or the quiet thud of a fist against wood. Her hand hovered near the doorframe as she debated what to do. They weren't exactly confidants. Would he resent her intrusion? Still, something in that sound, an undercurrent of frustration or maybe sadness, pulled her forward. She knocked lightly. "Ethan, you okay?" No response. Only another small, stifled noise. Heart quickening, she eased the door open just enough to peer inside. The scene startled her. Ethan sat hunched over his desk, shoulders slumped, one hand gripping his hair as if to keep his thoughts from spilling out. Papers littered the surface. Crumpled assignments, a half-empty notebook, a glowing laptop screen displaying something she couldn't yet see. His face was pale except for the red rims around his eyes. He jerked upright when he sensed her, quickly swiping at his cheeks and spinning toward the computer as though to hide it. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice tight with embarrassment. The narrator's instinct was to apologize and retreat, but she stayed. In that split second, she realized this wasn't the irritation of a teenager caught gaming. It was something heavier, something that demanded she stay present. An ordinary afternoon had just shifted into something far more significant, and she could feel that the next words she chose might change everything that followed. The tension in Ethan's room settled like a dense fog. The narrator remained by the doorway, careful not to crowd him, but unwilling to back away. Ethan's sudden defensiveness, his hunched shoulders, the way his hand hovered protectively over the laptop, spoke volumes. She sensed that if she retreated now, whatever fragile chance to understand what was happening would vanish. "I didn't mean to barge in," she said softly, her voice deliberately steady. "I just heard something. Are you okay?" Ethan gave a half shrug without meeting her eyes. "I'm fine." The words were brittle, more reflex than truth. He turned slightly as if hoping she would accept the lie and leave, but the room itself contradicted him. Papers lay scattered across the desk and floor, math worksheets covered in crossed-out numbers, a half-written essay with paragraphs slashed in red ink, and a spiral notebook open to a page of frantic scribbles. Amid the mess sat a printed college brochure, its glossy cover bent and torn, a cruel reminder of looming decisions. The glow of his laptop screen caught her attention. Even from a distance, she recognized the sharp outline of an email window. She caught a glimpse of bold text. "We regret to inform you," before Ethan quickly closed it with a tap that was almost a slap. Her heart tightened. College rejection. It was a moment she remembered from her own youth. the sting of a dream deferred, and she felt an instinctive sympathy. But the weight on Ethan's face told her this wasn't just disappointment over one application. "Ethan," she said gently, taking a tentative step into the room, "it looks like you've been working really hard. And it also looks hard. Do you want to talk about it?" He swiveled his chair to face her, jaw clenched. "You wouldn't get it," he muttered. "It's not—" He broke off, shaking his head, a mixture of frustration and shame flashing across his features. She crouched slightly, so her eyes were level with his. "Maybe I won't get everything, but I'd like to try." For a long moment, the only sounds were the faint hum of the computer and the slow tick of the hallway clock. Finally, Ethan exhaled a shaky breath. "I can't do this," he said, barely above a whisper. "School, applications, all of it. Everyone expects me to be perfect, but I'm not. I'm just failing." His confession landed heavily. The narrator recognized not only academic stress, but something deeper, the fear of letting people down, the crushing weight of unspoken expectations. She thought of Mark, Ethan's father, often praising his late wife's brilliance and Ethan's inherited potential. Did Ethan feel he had to live up to a mother's memory as well as a father's hopes? Resisting the urge to rush in with solutions, she simply nodded, letting silence stretch long enough to feel safe. Inside, she was already wrestling with how to help without overstepping. Their relationship had always been careful, respectful, but distant. Yet in this moment, the distance felt like a wall they might finally have the chance to dismantle. That realization was bittersweet. Painful because of Ethan's obvious struggle, but powerful because it might be the first real opening between them. The air in Ethan's bedroom felt dense, as though every breath carried the weight of unspoken fears. After his admission, "I'm just failing," the narrator resisted the instinct to fill the silence with reassurance. Years of careful coexistence with her stepson had taught her that rushing in with advice often made him retreat. Instead, she stayed seated on the edge of the rug, hands loosely clasped, her posture open and calm. "I know it probably took a lot to say that," she said quietly. "Thank you for trusting me, even a little." Ethan stared at the floor, his sneaker tracing slow circles in the carpet fibers. "It's not like I have a choice," he muttered, though his voice lacked real bite. "You caught me." "I didn't mean to," she admitted. "I was just worried, but I'm glad I did." She paused, letting the words settle. "You don't have to handle all of this alone." For the first time, he glanced up, his eyes wary but searching. "You wouldn't understand," he said, echoing his earlier protest, but softer now. "It's complicated," she nodded. "Probably more than I can imagine. But complicated doesn't mean you have to keep it bottled up." Another stretch of silence followed, punctuated only by the faint buzz of his laptop cooling fan. She resisted the urge to move closer, remembering how he often guarded his personal space. Instead, she chose honesty, something she had rarely risked with him. "When I was your age," she began, "I applied to 3 universities I thought were perfect. 2 said no. The one that said yes was the last one I expected. I cried for days before I realized the world hadn't ended." Ethan's eyebrow lifted slightly, skepticism mingling with curiosity. "Yeah, but you figured it out." She gave a small laugh. "Not right away. I felt like a failure. And that was just college stuff, not everything else you've been dealing with." His sneaker stilled. "Everything else?" She met his gaze. "I know it's been a tough few years. Losing your mom, adjusting to me being here. None of that is easy." Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of surprise that she had named the grief they both usually avoided. He looked away quickly, but the tightness in his shoulders softened. "It's like—" He hesitated, voice barely above a whisper. "Like everyone expects me to be strong all the time. Dad keeps saying Mom would be proud if I got into a great school. Teachers keep talking about potential. And I just can't." The narrator's heart ached. She wanted to reach out to hug him, but she sensed touch might still be too much. "That sounds like a lot to carry," she said. "No wonder it feels impossible." He nodded faintly, a tear slipping down despite his effort to hide it. "Ethan," she continued gently, "being strong doesn't mean doing everything perfectly. Sometimes it means letting someone else share the load." For the first time since she'd entered the room, Ethan didn't argue. His shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in the quiet relief of finally being heard. The wall between them, carefully built over months, had begun to crack. And through that crack, the first glimmer of trust appeared. The room felt quieter now, but not with the earlier tension. Instead, it carried a tentative calm, like a fragile bridge forming between them. Ethan sat back in his chair, wiping at his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. The narrator remained on the floor, giving him space while still anchoring the conversation with her steady presence. "You know," she began softly, "I've been scared too. Maybe not about school, but about us." Ethan glanced at her, brow furrowed. "Us?" she nodded. "When your dad and I got married, I worried every single day that I'd never fit into this family. I told myself I had to be perfect, or I'd ruin things between you and your dad. I thought you'd always see me as an intruder." He tilted his head, curiosity flickering. "You? Scared?" "Terrified," she admitted with a small, rueful smile. "I didn't know how to be a stepmom without overstepping. I wanted to give you space, but I also wanted to be someone you could count on. I never knew if I was getting it right." Ethan leaned back, the corners of his mouth twitching as if he were considering a half-smile. "I did think you were trying too hard at first," she chuckled. "Fair, I was. I used to Google things like how to bond with a teenage stepson. I'm pretty sure half the advice I tried just made you roll your eyes." He actually laughed, a quiet, surprised sound that eased the tightness in the room. "Maybe a little," he admitted. Encouraged, she continued, her tone gentle but candid. "I know I can never replace your mom. I don't want to. She's part of you, and I respect that. But I do care about you more than I can explain. I want to help, even if it's just listening." Ethan's gaze dropped to the carpet. "It's hard, you know? Everyone acts like I should be over it by now. But sometimes I still wake up thinking she's in the kitchen making pancakes. And then I remember." His voice cracked on the last word. The narrator felt her own throat tighten, a wave of empathy and grief washing over her. "Grief doesn't follow a schedule," she said quietly. "I still miss my mom, and she's been gone for years. It's okay to hurt, even when other people think you should be fine." For a long moment, they sat together in that shared understanding. No quick fixes, no platitudes, just the recognition of two people who had both lost someone important and were still learning how to live with that absence. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said finally. "Your dad and we both love you. We might not say it perfectly, but we do." Ethan inhaled slowly, then nodded. "I know," he whispered. "I just forget sometimes." The narrator felt something loosen inside her, a fragile but unmistakable bond forming. By admitting her own fears, she had given Ethan permission to reveal his. In that exchange of vulnerabilities, the distance that had defined their relationship began to dissolve, replaced by the first true sense of family. The following morning, a soft gray light filled the kitchen as the narrator brewed coffee and gathered her thoughts. The previous evening's conversation with Ethan lingered in her mind, his quiet confessions, the tentative trust that had begun to grow. She sensed that listening was only the first step. Now came the delicate task of helping him move forward without taking control. When Ethan came downstairs, his shoulders still carried a subtle heaviness, but there was less of the guarded tension she'd grown used to. He mumbled a sleepy, "Morning," and for the first time in weeks, she caught a faint spark of connection in his eyes. "Morning," she replied, sliding a plate of toast across the table. "I was thinking, maybe we could make a plan together. Just a small one. No pressure." Ethan raised an eyebrow but didn't immediately retreat, which she took as a good sign. "A plan for what?" "For school. For applications. For you," she said carefully. "Not a grand strategy, just something manageable. Like the first step in a long hike. We don't need to reach the summit today." He exhaled, fiddling with a crumb on the plate. "I guess I could use a map. Right now everything feels like a maze." "Then let's start small," she suggested. She fetched a notepad and pen, setting them between them like a neutral meeting space. "Maybe write down what's bothering you most. Classes, deadlines. Just get it out of your head and onto paper." At first, he hesitated. But eventually, he began to jot a few items. college essay, math grade, soccer tryouts, and after a pause, anxiety. Seeing the word in black ink seemed to lift a fraction of the burden from his face. "Okay," she said gently. "Now, for each one, let's write a tiny next step. Not a fix, just the next step. For the essay, maybe setting a timer for 15 minutes of brainstorming. For math, maybe emailing the teacher about extra help." Ethan nodded slowly. "That doesn't sound impossible." They added another step, reaching out to the school counselor. The narrator offered to help draft the email if he wanted. He didn't answer right away, but eventually said, "Maybe. Could you look at it with me before I send it?" "Of course," she said, warmth spreading through her chest. As they worked, the narrator was careful to keep the focus on his choices. She knew this had to be his plan, not hers. By the time they finished, the notepad held a list of small, achievable tasks instead of a mountain of vague dread. Before heading upstairs, Ethan lingered by the counter. "Thanks," he said, the word quiet but sincere. Later that evening, the narrator shared the conversation with her husband, Mark. She recounted Ethan's struggles and their new plan, emphasizing that Ethan needed understanding, not lectures. Mark listened intently, concern etched on his face, but relief, too. Relief that they finally knew what was happening and could face it as a family. For the narrator, the day marked a turning point. It wasn't a dramatic breakthrough or a sudden cure. It was something steadier and more hopeful, the beginning of teamwork, a series of small steps that, taken together, would lead them all toward healing and growth. That evening, the house hummed with the quiet familiarity of family life. The low murmur of the television downstairs, the faint scent of dinner still hanging in the air. Yet beneath that normalcy, the narrator felt the weight of a new responsibility. She had promised Ethan that she and Mark would support him. And now it was time to bring Mark into the circle of trust without breaking the fragile progress Ethan had made. After Ethan retreated to his room to finish homework, she found Mark in the living room reading the day's news on his tablet. She eased onto the couch beside him, fingers absently twisting the edge of a cushion. "We need to talk about Ethan," she said quietly. Mark set the tablet aside immediately, concern flashing across his face. "Is he okay? He's struggling?" she explained, choosing her words carefully. "School stress, college applications, the pressure of expectations. He feels like he's failing, like he can't live up to what everyone wants from him." She paused, then added, "He also misses his mom more than he lets on." Mark's shoulders sagged, a mix of worry and guilt washing over him. "I should have seen it," he murmured. "I thought I was giving him space, but maybe I've just been distracted." "You've both been grieving," she said gently. "It's not about blame, but he needs to know he doesn't have to carry this alone, especially not to live up to anyone's memory." Mark nodded, his jaw tightening with resolve. "We'll talk to him. Tonight." A few minutes later, they knocked softly on Ethan's door. He looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face when he saw them together. "What's up?" he asked, guarded but curious. Mark took a slow breath. "Your stepmom told me what's been going on. She wasn't trying to invade your privacy. She was worried. And so am I." Ethan's eyes widened, then darted to her, as if checking whether she had betrayed him. She met his gaze steadily. "I only shared what you said because I think you need both of us," she explained. "We're a team." For a tense moment, Ethan's expression hardened, but then it softened. "Okay," he said quietly. "I guess that's fair." Mark sat on the edge of the bed. "Son, I know I talk a lot about how proud your mom would be. Maybe I made it sound like you had to do something extraordinary to earn that. But you don't. She loved you for who you are, not for your grades or the college you get into. And so do I." The room grew still. Ethan blinked rapidly, struggling to hold back tears. "I just don't want to let you down," he whispered. "You could never let me down," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're in this together. Whatever path you choose, I'm with you." The narrator watched as father and son shared a quiet embrace, a connection deeper than words. For the first time in months, the house felt lighter, less like three separate lives under one roof and more like a true family, united in understanding and love. The weeks that followed unfolded with a slow but unmistakable shift. What once felt like a household of parallel lives began to resemble a true family rhythm, each small change adding up to something significant. Ethan's first step was reaching out to the school counselor, a task that had seemed intimidating when they first wrote it on the notepad. One evening, he quietly announced over dinner that he had scheduled the appointment. His voice carried a tentative pride, and both Mark and the narrator responded with warm encouragement, careful not to make it into a spectacle. It was a single action, but it signaled that he was ready to take ownership of his well-being. Academically, too, small victories emerged. Ethan began handing in assignments on time, no longer weighed down by the paralysis of perfectionism. When his math grade nudged upward from a C to a B-, he shared the news with a shy smile. The narrator noticed how Mark celebrated the effort rather than the number, saying, "I'm proud of how hard you worked," which seemed to lighten Ethan's shoulders even more. Outside of school, they discovered new rituals together. On Saturday mornings, the narrator started making tea after her own workout, and Ethan, initially drawn by the aroma, began joining her. At first, they sat in companionable silence, sipping from mismatched mugs while the sun edged across the kitchen tiles. Gradually, those quiet sessions blossomed into real conversations about music, movies, even childhood memories of his mother. They never forced the topics. They simply let them surface like small treasures. Mark, too, found ways to strengthen the bond. He and Ethan reinstated their old tradition of weekend walks in the nearby park. Sometimes the narrator joined them, sometimes not, respecting the father-son space that had its own importance. When she did tag along, she noticed how laughter came easier, how Ethan's once guarded expressions now held genuine warmth. Therapy also became part of the routine. At first, Ethan shared little about the sessions, but one evening he mentioned that his counselor had helped him reframe the college process. It wasn't a test of worth, but a search for the right environment. That insight seemed to lift an invisible weight, and he began approaching applications with calmer determination rather than dread. Their family dinners reflected the transformation. Conversations stretched beyond the usual small talk to include lively debates about current events, shared jokes, and occasional storytelling about the narrator's own youthful misadventures. The once familiar silence at the table was replaced by easy chatter, punctuated by laughter that felt both surprising and long overdue. The narrator often found herself reflecting on how these moments, tea at dawn, a slightly improved grade, a quiet confidence in Ethan's posture, were as significant as any grand achievement. Healing, she realized, wasn't a single breakthrough, but a mosaic of steady, ordinary steps. Most of all, she sensed a deepening trust. Ethan now sought her input on essays or asked her to proofread a paragraph, something unimaginable only weeks earlier. He even teased her gently about her overuse of sticky notes, a sign that he no longer saw her merely as a polite stranger, but as someone safe. These small victories were not dramatic headlines, but together they formed the quiet, enduring proof that their family, once tentative and fragile, was growing stronger, bound by shared effort, mutual respect, and the slow, rewarding work of love. Spring arrived almost unnoticed, creeping in with longer days and soft breezes that carried the scent of fresh grass through open windows. The house itself felt lighter now, as if the months of quiet effort had lifted an invisible weight from its walls. The narrator noticed it in small ways. In the easy banter during dinner, in the way Ethan no longer disappeared behind a closed door for hours, and in the gentle warmth that lingered even after conversations ended. One sunny afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in the mail addressed to Ethan. The bold university crest on the corner caught the narrator's eye as she sorted through the stack. She resisted the urge to peek, placing it carefully on the kitchen counter where Ethan would see it. When he returned from school, his eyes widened at the sight of it. "Looks official," she said with a smile, stepping back to give him space. He hesitated for a moment, fingers tracing the edge of the envelope.
Will you?
"Stay while I open it?" he asked. The narrator's heart warmed at the request. Of course. Mark came in from the backyard just as Ethan slid a finger under the seal. The three of them stood together, silent except for the faint tear of paper. Ethan unfolded the letter, eyes scanning quickly, then slowing as a small, incredulous smile began to form. "I got in," he whispered, his voice equal parts disbelief and relief. "They want me." Mark let out a breathy laugh, pulling Ethan into a proud hug. "That's fantastic, son," the narrator joined, resting a hand on Ethan's back. "I knew you'd find the right place," she said, careful to emphasize right place rather than prestige. They all understood this acceptance was more than an academic achievement. It was proof of Ethan's resilience and the quiet courage he had found within himself. In the weeks that followed, their home buzzed with the practical excitement of preparation. They compared dorm options, scheduled orientation dates, and debated whether he really needed to bring his entire collection of soccer jerseys. Yet amid the logistical details, the narrator often found herself pausing to reflect on how far they had come. She remembered that first afternoon months ago, the closed bedroom door, the choked sounds of frustration, the fear that she might never truly reach him. Now those memories felt distant, like shadows of a different life. The bond they had built wasn't just about school success. It was about trust, the kind forged through late-night talks, shared vulnerability, and countless small gestures of support. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed across the sky, Ethan turned to her. "Thanks," he said quietly, "for everything, for being here." The words were simple, but their sincerity settled deep in her heart. "I'm proud of you," she replied, "not because of a college letter, because you faced all of it and kept going." As dusk wrapped the house in gentle hues, the narrator recognized that this was only the beginning of their story. What had started as an unexpected, awkward intrusion had become the catalyst for something lasting, a family defined not by perfection or titles, but by love, understanding, and the courage to grow together into the next chapter of their lives.